Hey, Peggy.
Hi, Rashina. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Peggy.
Thank you.
Yes, I can.
Oh, good. That sounded like Igor.
Yes, I am.
That's not a virtual background. How cool is
This
your
is not fair, Peggy.
background?
Sorry.
This is not fair. I think you should turn off your camera.
It's summer. I will in a minute.
You're actually
I don't have the greatest reception though, unfortunately.
Am I breaking up though? I've been having horrible Wi-Fi problems. Am I breaking up? Can you see me, hear me?
I can see you and hear you. It's not too bad. Igor, can you hear okay with Gina?
Yes, it's clear. Not
You
breaking at all.
Yeah. And am I clear?
Good. I just had another Zoom meeting. It was horrible. People are coming in.
Is
It's good.
This is such an adventure, isn't it?
I don't see him yet.
Hmm.
That's one way to put it.
I think, you know, I don't know that he confirmed my email, but that I sent today. Now that I think about it.
He did confirm mine. I sent one last night, Peggy. So and I sent him the link too.
Good.
Peggy, I love how you're doing the life balancing, like what we talked about yesterday with John. You are doing it today. That's the way.
Be doing it.
Balance life.
The boat has swung around, so I'm going to switch sides on my boat. A new Zoom problem.
Yeah.
There we go. This is better. Might need to move the blanket.
Hi guys.
Oh, there he is. Hey, Neno.
Hey, Neno.
Hey, Neno.
How's it going?
Good.
Not bad. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Are we doing fake backgrounds or real backgrounds, or are we so lucky that our real background looks like a fake background? Huh, Peggy?
Hey.
Peggy's the luckiest, I guess. She's the only one with a real background that looks better than any fake background.
Yeah. Let me try to get this TV out of the way. Nobody needs to really see that I have a TV next to my desk.
I customized one just for you, see? Right here.
Ah, that's nice.
Yeah, this is my sailing time.
Well, you know, it's tough, but I guess when you have to do it, you have to do it.
Have to do it. Thanks for doing this.
The weather looks pretty glorious too.
You know what? It's been really good, but the sun just came out a few minutes ago, so it's all good.
Yep. Sounds like it.
And my internet connection's working.
We've got a couple more minutes. Neno.
Yeah.
Sure.
We already got a few people on the call. So I'm just the backup chair. It's
We've
Rashina.
got 21 at the moment.
Oh, very nice. And Neno, sorry for the mix-up with the time zone thing.
It's okay. I just had to move a couple of things around. I mean, it cleared up my evening tomorrow evening, so that's nice.
That's cool. Got the chat ready here. I guess that's where the questions appear.
Yeah.
Although I'm more than happy for people to just sort of speak up directly. I have a couple of slides. Let me just share my screen. It's just, wait, so, okay, it's gonna do share screening. That's fine. It's basically introducing us, but I could just do that directly, no problem. How do I pronounce your last name properly, Neno?
Medvidovic.
Medvidovic.
Yes.
Cool. That is bang on what my son said it would be.
Oh, nice. Smart kid.
Yeah, he guessed it. All right, so it is time. We can get started. I'm sure people will keep pouring in, which is good. So welcome everybody to this second of the Ask Me Anything sessions at XE 2020. I am Rashina Hoda. I am an associate professor and an associate dean at Monash. Pleasure to welcome today Professor Nenad Medvidovic, or well, very, very lovingly known as Neno by everybody. So welcome, Neno.
Thank you.
So the setup for today is pretty informal, and the idea is, as the name suggests, to ask me anything. It's a chance for the audience to ask Neno anything pretty much that he's comfortable, I guess, answering. Let me just give a very quick sort of introduction, although he really doesn't need one. But Neno at the moment is a professor in the computer science department and in the informatics program at the University of Southern California. He is the founding director of the Soft Art Laboratory at this University of Southern California. And if you didn't guess already, that means his research focused on architecture-based software development. So some of the selected services, there were so many, I couldn't list everything, but some of the more, ones that are more recent, I guess, is he serves as the editor-in-chief for the IEEE Transactions on Software Engineering. He has been the chair for the ACM Special Interest Group on Software Engineering, the chair for the steering committees of XE 2013 up to 2015, and the Symposium on the Foundations of Software Engineering from 2015 to 2017. He was also the program co-chair for XE 2011. And among the many awards, again, more than I can list, influential paper, and he's also an ACM Distinguished Fellow and an IEEE Fellow. So an amazing opportunity for all of us to have this session with Neno, and I'm super excited and hoping people have a lot of questions. So what we'll do is, the idea is to keep it really interactive, and you can either choose to type your question into the chat box if that's what you wanted, but I would really encourage people more so to put your video on if you want, and put your audio on and ask a question. So I'm going to try and moderate that just so that there aren't too many people asking a question at the same time. But other than that, yeah, that's kind of how we roll. Oh, and we've got a question already. So Neno, there's a question up here that says, what are your experiences / suggestions? When should we stop the improvement cycle?
Well, that should be the last question. That's a hard question to answer in general. Yes, Peggy, Rashina broke up for me as well. I saw your question in the text box. She broke up just at the time where she was setting the ground rules for how this should run, meaning that there are no rules, basically, because we didn't hear any. So we can do anything we want. But joking aside, so there is a saying in kind of colloquial English in the US, and I've heard it from people in Britain as well, so I'm guessing it must be used broadly, which is don't let perfect get in the way of good. And that's essentially the kind of rule of thumb that you should apply in your research when you are looking to see how far you should push an idea, how far you should try to perfect it before you either try to publish it or try to graduate with that idea as kind of the linchpin of your research. It's really difficult to determine in a general case. I think very often you'll be able to tell. And sometimes your advisor will be able to tell you, look, it's time. You know, we've kind of worked around the edges of this problem. Let's see what we can publish from this. And so both because it's beneficial to you, but also so we can move on to some other aspects of this work. It's the kind of conversation that I will have with my students relatively frequently. Perfection is not only is it not required, but it's not possible. So now the other question that you asked in the written in the box, how do you know if your research is good enough? That's the kind of the $1 million question, right? Because that's what we all are trying to understand and figure out. You read a lot, you figure out what everybody else around you is working on. You read papers, you figure out what other people are publishing as their research. It's not a guarantee that you'll be able to publish your research of comparable quality. There is sometimes maybe an element of luck. There's also bias on our part. We tend to be partial to our own research, things of that nature. But you know, it's incredibly important early on to get really familiar with how your community thinks and breathes and shares ideas and what's considered acceptable, what's not considered acceptable. And then last but not least, don't be afraid to fail. I remember 20 years ago at ICSI in Limerick, the program committee right after ICSI was held for FSC 2000 at the time. I had 2 submissions, both of them got rejected. And the next day, several of us, including a couple of more senior colleagues, went on a road trip around the western part of Ireland. And I was really feeling down. And I was, you know, they'd ask me here and there what happened. And I would just kind of pour out this frustration and sadness that my papers got rejected and so on, until a much more senior person in our community said, you know what, I probably had more papers rejected than you have even written. And it feels like crap every single time. So just kind of buck up and let's have a good day. And that's kind of how you have to go about it. You'll get rejected. There's no question about it. Learn something from it, move on, and hopefully good things will happen.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Very, very cool. There's also a side discussion between John and Yuri going on here about perfection that is often expected from ICSI reviewers. Followed up with a comment on, well, we have plenty of perfect papers rejected also. So there is no no winning there. Cool, keep the questions coming, people. You can also unmute yourself and talk directly.
Neno, thank you so much. I think you are brave to take this and any question people throw at you. So as Peggy said, here is an easy one for you. No, I'm joking. You'll probably spend some time thinking about this, but I would really love to hear your opinion. So my question is, what's the best advice that you ever received in your professional life? Who gave it to you, and why it has served you so well during your career?
That's really 3 questions. Let me think about it for just a second. Because I've gotten a lot of good advice. I've been super lucky, super fortunate to have amazing colleagues. I also have screwed up enough so that people have felt comfortable saying, hey, you know, you might want to think about doing this better or differently or whatever. So that's kind of worked well. I think probably some of the best advice that I've gotten over the years has been to stick to problems that I believe in. To try to avoid the fads. And I've had 2 people, especially early on, who were very important in my development as a researcher, Dick Taylor and David Rosenblum. And both of them at various times would stress that. Because again, as you might imagine, you're an assistant professor. Danny, you've been one, so you know how that goes. You submit 6, 9, 12, 15 months worth of work to a conference. You really feel good about the paper. In the case of Yuri, your paper is actually objectively perfect, apparently, but it still gets rejected, right? And all of that work feels like it's going down the drain. And then you turn it around and submit it to the next good place, and it might get rejected again. You just, you know, it becomes a moving target. So there's a lot of frustration. And at the same time, you feel like, you know, there is work, and it happens to all of us. You'll sometimes, that's what I call jealous reading. You basically read other people's papers that got accepted, and you think to yourself, but my work is so much better. So that's kind of, I guess, basic human nature. The thing is, you shouldn't try to emulate other people by jumping onto the topics that they're being able to publish. If you feel and believe that your work is important and it's relevant, you should try to figure out how to actually make your work successful. So in that sense, I do have to say, especially early on, Dick and David helped me stay sane quite a number of times, because I've faced more than my fair share of rejection, I'm sure.
Very cool. Thanks for that question, Danny, and your very measured response, Neno. I'm gonna flick the next one from Peggy, actually, because it's super related, and that's what's the worst advice you've ever got and that you followed, but now you wish you had?
So it kind of dovetails with the question that John asked, and it's maybe not the worst decision, but it's because I don't know objectively. I won't. Maybe there is a parallel universe where I took that other path, and you know, if somehow I were able to talk to the other me, I might be able to. The two of us might be able to figure out whether this is something worth agonizing over or not. But the one thing that I have regretted time and again was not having gone on kind of through the full sort of recruiting cycle when I was graduating as a PhD student, or, you know, one might have been a postdoc. It doesn't matter. The kind of the very first academic job, since I'm an academic, maybe not everybody in the audience is, but there's only one chance in life you get to get your first academic job. And in my case, I was asked by a university that was in the same city to come and interview a year before I thought I would. I went out thinking, you know, it's going to be a fun experience. I'll learn something from it. And then when they made me an offer, the advice I got was, because I had a lot of doubts about whether this was the right decision or not. And in fact, it may have been the right decision. Who knows, right? I can't tell one way or another. But the advice that I got literally was, once I got the offer, well, it's a bird in the hand versus two in the bush. Meaning, if you decline this offer and go on the recruiting cycle the next year, who knows what's going to happen, right? And that was the risk that at that time, for reasons that we don't have to get into, I did not take. And there were many situations where I felt like maybe I should have taken that risk. I mean, I love my department. I like where I am. But ultimately, you know, if somebody told me 25 years ago that in 2020 I'll still be in Southern California, I'd probably say that they were, that was wishful thinking. But that's how it turned out.
Awesome. So more on risk taking, I guess, and Peggy's thanking you about such an honest response, she says. So I'm gonna, which I completely agree with. Thanks for sharing that. So people who are maybe younger, not being ageist, but just starting out perhaps with their careers and wanting to consider taking more risk. Although I have to say, with the current COVID situation, I'm not sure about risk taking. If you get that job offer, take it.
Yeah. That's the kind of the bird in the hand, right? It's the proverbial bird in the hand. In my case, I also had a young family, which is very common for people who are approaching the end of their PhD, starting their career. We're all in roughly, or a great majority of us, in roughly the same age range, between mid to late 20s to mid to late 30s. And while you're a PhD student, you may feel like you're putting a lot of things on the back burner. I can't tell you how much pressure I got from my own mother, who reminded me incessantly over the 5+ years that being a student is not a career, and, you know, that I need to start thinking about what I'm actually going to do for a living and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a pretty common story. I don't think there's anything unique about my particular story.
Cool, but good to be shared nonetheless. I think it's good for people to know that they're not alone in this, and it's quite common to face these kind of challenges, even coming from family, I guess. So looking into the questions, I've got a couple more and then some more coming in. So one from John Whittle saying, looking back at your career, what one thing would you change?
So I kind of answered that indirectly. I would have liked to have gone in a full-blown, 10 interview kind of cycle. I did not do that. For a really long time, I didn't know how other departments operate. And even nowadays, I will ask, there are people in this audience who I've asked directly, how do you do X in your department? Because you end up getting literally siloed. You're in one department, you have a body of experiences that is very unique. There are some experiences that translate, others are very different than other places. And I felt that given that my life turned out the way it did, and I ended up in the same place for such a long time, I do feel that I could have had a richer experience otherwise. And John is a good example. He has been to more than one place, so it does enrich you as an individual and as a researcher. So I've had to make up for that lack in other ways, obviously.
Cool, thanks. Another one here is from William Zumi, and it says, do you believe that reviews in journals are fairer than the reviews at conferences like ICSI? I think a lot of people would like that one answered.
That's a super tough question. So I've been on both sides of the equation. Obviously, I've reviewed for journals. I've reviewed for ICSI. I have been a chair of an ICSI. I'm right now editor-in-chief of a journal. The big difference, I think, that I notice is that if you can get, and that's a whole separate concern and one that will be discussed at a different time, in fact, at this ICSI, because it's an issue that spans all areas of computer science. If you can get 3 reviewers to actually agree to review your journal paper, my impression from the outside looking in right now is that the amount of pressure they feel to review that paper is somehow lower, simply because it's not so concentrated the way you get it at an ICSI, where you have whatever it is, 12 weeks to review N papers, where N divided by 2 must be reviewed within the first 6 or whatever. There's constantly this pressure to kind of keep churning out those reviews. And I've spoken to many people, and I've been in that situation many times myself, where you start hitting this point of panic where you have no idea how you're going to meet the deadline. You don't want to let the chairs down. You don't want to be the person whose name ends up getting disclosed as being the straggler, because people notice things like that. So I feel like maybe the whirlwind of activity surrounding the papers is slightly lower in the case of journals. But the flip side of that, William, is that it is generally easier to find reviewers for an ICSI. People don't typically turn down invitations to be on an ICSI PC, certainly not at the rate at which they turn down invitations to review for a journal. So it kind of cuts both ways. As far as the technical content of the reviews goes, I think journals have a significant advantage that reviewers can, when they're not entirely sure and when they feel like there is some value in a paper, they can opt for the major revision. In a conference, unfortunately, the decision is ultimately binary. So in a journal, you do get a chance to engage the reviewers of your paper in a dialogue of sorts. And that can be very helpful to at least you feeling like you're enfranchised. In a conference, you get the reviews, you write a rebuttal, you get the final reviews and the decision. And especially if the decision is negative, you may feel like I wasted my time with the rebuttal, they never read it, and so on. Of course, the reality is usually probably very different, but again, spoken to many people who've said things of that sort. So that's one dimension where journals do have an advantage over conferences, in my opinion.
Cool. We do have a few more that are some sort of in the same vein, and one's to do with again, Yuri asking, we've observed some moving in conferences reviewing towards a journal style reviewing. So you've got the idea of rebuttals and the 6-off discussion of rolling deadlines, etc. And journal publications moving towards conferences, so such as the journal first type presentations that we host, for example, at ICSI. Now, the question is, do you ever see a world in which these publication models merge to combine the best of the both worlds? For example, submissions are made to a journal, say TSC, reviewed and accepted or rejected, then presented at ICSI, which is the general first model, but they're saying and that is the only way to submit to ICSI. So do you see that happening, where coming in through the journal is the only way to?
So it's not an easy question to answer because there are too many constituencies involved right now. So for example, ICSI is both an ACM and an IEEE conference. TSC is just an IEEE journal. So one would have to talk to people in the two organizations. Somehow there would have to be some sort of way of reconciling that. Of course, another possibility would be for ICSI to say or our community to say, we're just gonna start our own journal and we're gonna have our own conference and we're not actually gonna be sponsored by anybody. We'll be sort of self-sponsored in a way. It's not beyond the realm of possible. We've seen some things happen within the last few years, first with the Journal First initiative, then with the merger of ESEC and FSC. Now there is a committee in place spanning ICSI, ASC, and ESEC FSC to discuss some of these issues about maybe fixing submission deadlines and conference deadlines, maybe moving to a rolling deadline model, and so on. And of course, because of COVID in particular, we have a situation right now where we have an online conference. So in some ways, what is the difference between having an online conference and having a journal that might organize a series of presentations in a concentrated format like this over a certain period of time? So it's not impossible, but I think there are certain bridges that would have to be crossed. And there are certainly entrenched interests, and there's also kind of sort of a conservative mindset among some people that, why change things since they've worked so well for so long, right? So, there's work to be done, and Yuri, I'm sure you'll be happy to help along with that. So, you volunteering your time is a step in the right direction.
There you go. So you've just volunteered as tribute.
There you
Now, next one up, I've got one here, making sure I don't miss this. As the editor-in-chief, Neno, what are your thoughts on green or open access? And this is a question from Laden, sorry if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly. So green or open access?
Yeah, well, so I think that it has to be made affordable. That's the major concern that I have, is that models that I've seen have tended to basically punish the authors, and not punish in a traditional sense, but there are people who do fantastic research who don't come from quote unquote rich universities, and it might be, and also there are areas even within software engineering where funding is not as readily obtainable as other areas. You publishing a paper and having to pay a sizable fee up front to have it open access you're essentially getting punished for your success. So I think that it could work really well, but the community on the whole would have to, and I know that you and as part of TCSC and Tom Zimmerman as part of SIGSOFT, that there have been conversations about engaging publishers and negotiating these costs down so that it becomes much more attractive. A couple $100 per paper, that's something that could be doable, but I haven't seen numbers go that low. In fact, I've seen numbers that have been much more exorbitant than that. And in that case, it becomes a more difficult proposition for a lot of authors. So personally, I'm in favor of it, but there has to be some kind of the economic model has to be thought through better than what I've seen so far.
Awesome. I've got one from Danny, which is a very timely question. What are the life and professional lessons that you are learning during the COVID-19 crisis?
So I think that the big thing that I enjoyed initially, that is, I'm deciding
think Nino's turn to have a little bit of technical trouble here.
Yeah, same for me. He seems stuck for me as well. I'm never sure if it's me or somebody else when something happens.
Okay, I can see everybody else moving.
This is the same for me as well. Peggy, you're in a nice place. Can I join you?
Sure.
If I could jump, I'll do it.
Peg, you remind me of we all live on a yellow submarine. So if you could all live on your yellow submarine or your sailboat, like we would come there.
Yeah.
If anybody's getting seasick, let me know. I like video because I think it helps the speaker, right? Know that there's people responding. So I keep putting it on, but if it's distracting, I'll turn it off.
No, it's good to see you. But the thing is, for us here in Ontario, it's almost the end of the day, and I had a long day. Now I'm so.
Now you have some jet lag.
Yeah, it's almost 10:30 right now at our time. For you guys, it's good. Yeah, it's good to see you.
Nino is back.
There is Nino back.
Yeah.
Hey.
Nino's back, and Zeng made a very cool comment about how timely this was. So that was your response, Nino, to the question, how are you coping with a crisis? You just turn off.
You know, this has been my kind of least favorite aspect of this, is the fact that everything happens through Zoom, among other technologies, and then you end up having little control over how things go. So Rashina, you had some issues with the audio a little while ago. I died right now for a second for reasons that I don't understand. But really, no, my least favorite thing, Danny, to get back to your question, is the fact that there is a complete blurring right now of work and personal life. And it's incredibly difficult for me to maintain the discipline and say to myself, okay, it's whatever, 10 p.m. and I'm not going to work anymore. I'm not going to answer emails or whatever. You know, not everybody is the same. Some people are more disciplined about it. Some people are more, you know, I guess, reasonable about it. But that's been kind of this impulse that since, well, this is work. I'm working here. This is my job, just like it is my home. That impulse to kind of go to the office, the virtual office, you know, look if something is going on. I actually think it's been harming my productivity in the end, because I feel like I try to do more things in a single day, but become less focused over time. And that's something that I've begun realizing relatively recently. So I've been trying to change that a little bit.
Cool.
Okay. Can you also answer is there something positive that you're learning through this crisis? Is there something like a good change? Maybe you were talking about that, but then we lost you because you're.
So the positive thing for me, and it's not going to be the same for everybody, is that so the crisis itself eliminated 2 hours of commuting for me every single day. So I got 2 hours of my life to do something with, and I'm not sure that I guess the downside is that I'm not sure that I've made the best use of that 2 hours. So now I'm kind of making a conscious effort to, you know, fit it in with other things that take place of me just kind of, you know, answering more email or handling yet another TSC paper, or, you know, glancing at this abstract because this paper looks really interesting. While at the same time, so some of you who were here early on when I logged in saw that I have actually a TV right next to my workspace in my office. So I have a soccer game on at various times, but that basically just means that I just sit here all the time. I have no reason to get up. If somebody were just to also kind of insert a feeding tube, I'm sure I could just spend days in this chair without moving, and that's of course not good.
You know what? I'm just gonna break the protocol a little bit for about, say, 4 minutes and invite other people, because we've got such a variety of people in different corners of the world. Do you want to share maybe your best sort of tips on coping with the crisis at the moment, or anything you're particularly wanting to ask, or if you have answers for?
my advice is to give up all hope and just assume you're not going to accomplish anything, and then it's okay.
Right, very optimistic.
No, it's great, because then if you accomplish something, then that's more than you expected.
Okay, as a frame of mind, but not truly to give up hope, right? Cool. Anybody else has got something to share on how they're coping with the crisis with regards to the professional and private lives?
Yeah, I started keeping a gratitude journal. So every morning, I shouldn't call it a journal, it's jotting. I'm just like typing, on the notes app, like 2-3 things, trying to keep like between 3 and 5 things everything I'm grateful for. So it has given me, and when I look back over the weeks, it gave me such a strong sense of, look, like 90% of things I'm grateful for is relationships. And it put my whole perspective, it changed my eyeglass, or my lens of which I'm looking through life. And I'm appreciating a lot of the people in my life. And at the same time, I try to kind of feed that positive side, and at the same time kind of starve the negative cycle of reading news. So I don't allow myself to read news except for a certain amount of time, and I don't do that first thing in the morning. So if I notice that if I start the day reading the news, or if I end the day reading the news, at either the beginning or the end of the day, it's not going to be a good day. So kind of like minimizing, getting out of that cycle of the news, and at the same time feeding the positive side, and remind myself what I'm grateful for in life.
Absolutely, that's brilliant. And a grateful journal, or at least just actually writing it down, sounds really, really useful. And I can't agree more on the news side of things. Gosh, too much is no good at this point. Okay, I'm gonna segue back now into our format, and that's picking up on Joanna's question. In line with Danny's question, any advice for senior PhD students? So this is for you, Neno. In particular, handling the ongoing PhD struggles on top of handling the worries on job market uncertainty. And Joanna, Nino's going to have a go. And if you want to add in a little bit more, because I can see you there, feel free to unmute and, ask a follow-up. So Neno, over to you.
Am I back with you guys? With everybody?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on. But anyway.
Could you catch the question, Neno? Do you want me to repeat it?
Yes, please. The last thing I heard was Danny himself mentioning a couple of things about how, I'm guessing, how the pandemic has affected his outlook on things and the way he works. And then I got cut out again for some reason.
Oh, okay. So that was good timing, because I invited other people to comment and didn't realize you'd actually dropped off. It was good cover up there for good teamwork.
I should have said nothing. Huh.
Joanna's question here is, any advice for senior PhD students, in particular handling the ongoing PhD struggles on top of handling the worries on job market uncertainty?
Yeah. Let me just say, I feel pretty awful for you. This is not a fun time for anybody, but certainly trying to figure out exactly what is going to happen with your life and how things are going to go. Right now, when you're at the point where you're really close to completing something that you've worked for so long, that has got to be really tough. I mean, the best advice that I can give you is try not to sweat things over which you have no control. Our field is such that we really are blessed. Everybody's going to have a job. I mean, modulo some exceptional cases, I guess. But the job market worldwide is still incredibly strong for people in our field. So in that sense, we don't have to at least worry about sort of putting food on the table. The sad part of it is you might not be able to get the job that you thought you'd be able to get. But at the same time, as I think anybody who is in academia in this group who's been around for a while will tell you, you never actually have a guarantee that you'll be able to get the kind of job you want, because you don't control when you're graduating compared to what jobs are open and where. And there's always a little bit of a gamble as far as where you might end up. Sometimes the situation turns out to work out even better than you thought it might. In other cases, you might take your second or third best or most favored option. So it's never perfect to begin with. Right now, we're all under a lot of stress. We miss human contact. Well, at least those of us who are adhering to the physical distancing recommendations that exist in many places. Our regular kind of everyday activities have changed. I was just telling somebody today that I don't remember the last time I went to have a meal in a restaurant, for example. Those things do take a toll over time. And then there is some other stuff that you just can't control. So my advice would be just kind of try to take it in stride. You're really close to accomplishing something that in and of itself is incredible. So savor that. The other stuff will come. You don't have to have one job in your life. You can move if the first one is not exactly what you want. There are options with doing a postdoc for a couple of years until things settle down a bit. And you actually never know. There are also possibilities that there are going to be departments that feel like right now might be the time to hire, because it's a good opportunity to get people who they might otherwise have a difficult time attracting because of a lot of competition. So who knows what kinds of strategies you might see from various places. My advice generally is to just kind of, don't stress, roll with the punches, and things will work out in the end anyway.
Well, I see Joanna smiling to that, so pretty satisfied. Thanks, Neno.
Sure.
We've got another one here from Fung, who says, hi, what are your suggestions on when to stop doing, I'm assuming, research in a certain topic or direction?
That's a hard question to answer. You should stop doing it when you get a sense that the hard questions have been answered, or that the important questions have been answered. And of course, you should stop doing it when it stops being fun for you, when it's really not interesting you anymore. It's hard enough what we do. You're going to get pulled every which way. You have to do 10 things at a time. There's too much to do, not enough time, not enough energy, etc. So at the least, you should try to do what you enjoy. So I think doing what you feel is fun is going to go a really long way toward kind of adding to that general sense of job and more generally life satisfaction. Sometimes an idea just doesn't stick. And I remember actually Yuri is here, and he and I got this Test of Time award a couple of days ago. And we talked a little bit about how we were going to present the work behind, or the kind of the run up to the paper, and then some subsequent papers, etc. Long story short, the reason for that is that work was rejected from a bunch of different places. And I remember we had submitted to an ICSI. I forget which ICSI it was. Would have been like ICSI 2009, because I think the PC dinner was in Atlanta, if I remember correctly. And I was sitting at a table with Betty Chang, and at that time the secrets were not kept as well as a little bit later on, as far as which papers were discussed and whether your paper got in or not. And I knew that my paper was rejected. It was the first night of the 2-day PC meeting. So Betty and I were sitting down, and I was saying, I was lamenting about the fact that I have this really smart PhD student, and so this was about the 2008 timeframe, late 2008. He's close to graduating, and we just can't get this work published. And she basically said, look, you have an idea, you send it around a couple of times. Sometimes it just doesn't stick, and you have to move on. And so you also have to kind of listen to the pulse of the community. In our case, for us, the solution was to look outside of software engineering, or at least to broaden our horizon. And that panned out in the long run. So the long game was successful, but there really were no guarantees there either. In other words, we could have just kept getting rejected forever and ever, and then eventually you take the hint and move on. Try to figure out, why. Why do people not care about the problem? Just because you care about it doesn't mean that it's going to be publishable, that it's important, that the solution is going to be useful to somebody, etc. So you have to kind of, back to the original thing, which it never stops. You have to keep reading. So you read when you're starting your PhD, you read when you're approaching retirement, and every day in between. You have to figure out kind of what everybody is studying, what are the important problems, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and so on.
No, absolutely. I think that value of reading is super, super important. Sometimes I feel really guilty as being, only being able to read up when you're assigned a review paper. How do you find the time? It's amazing. It's like, that's my excuse to get myself reading on what's the latest and the greatest.
Yeah.
But super important. Cool. I've got one from Igor here. Says, how do you envision the future of conferences after all the experiences with virtualization? Do you see things that will become the standard for the next conference? I think everyone's kind of thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not clairvoyant, so I would not trust kind of my intuition in this case. My guess is that things will revert back to at least some notion of physical conferences, assuming that this ever gets resolved in a way where traveling and gathering in large groups is going to become, again, reasonably safe. My intuition is, I'm not an expert in the area, obviously, my intuition is that will happen. In other words, we're not going to be in this situation indefinitely. And then I think people will go back to some of this more kind of in-person type of interaction. Again, if you look at ICSI, this has been a really interesting experiment. And for all intents and purposes, this has worked really well. It's actually showed that you can do this kind of thing, you can pull things off. But at the same time, this is not the same experience that you have when we're all in one place. And there is a lot of interpersonal kind of interaction and a lot of sharing of ideas that is not going to happen this week. That would have happened in an in-person ICSI. So some kind of balance will have to be struck, because there are going to be people who don't like to travel or cannot travel, or choose not to travel. And for them, it's clear that providing access to this content is going to be very useful, because we're all finding it useful because we're forced to be in this situation. And then there are going to be people who are going to be, for whom it's going to be important to show up, to see other people, to meet people in their community, to feel like they're part of this larger community, which we are. And in fact, I think people earlier in their careers might find that very useful. That was always incredibly useful to me. ICSI was, since I had a young family and for a while I was a single dad with small children, ICSI was the one trip I took every year, because I felt like, that was an investment worth making. And I personally feel that it would be a shame if we just went fully online all the time. I don't think it's going to happen, but in an extreme scenario where, let's say, that were to happen, I'd feel kind of sad that it did.
Cool. I'm just tying that in with the comment from Octavio, who said, I'm attending ICSI for the first time. Welcome, Octavio. And that's one of the positive sides of the crisis for them. And they said they're really liking these kinds of talks. And in fact, that's one thing John said as well, was around continuing the Ask Me Anything format, so that people do seem to be enjoying that. And it's enabling some people who would not have otherwise been able to come to participate. But I do agree, I'd kind of missed the coffee, and corridor conversations. So hopefully we can have the best of both going forward in some format. Cool. I'm going to now try and pick up this question from before, and it was again from Layden. If you could only give your students one advice, only one piece of advice, what would it be?
I love in the I don't love sense, these questions. If you could only do one thing, you know, if you could only pick one of your children, which one would it be? It's going to sound so cliche, but it's really true. If you can help it, do what you like. It doesn't have to be something that you absolutely love, because that's maybe not realistic, but at least do what you like. If there is an opportunity to pursue things that interest you, go for it. Avail yourself of that opportunity. Don't go after the easy publication. That's kind of the, you know, it's not as satisfying in the long run. That would be kind of the you know, maybe the bow on top of that bit of advice.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I think challenging ourselves, absolutely. What else do we have? Got quite a few. I'm hoping, I'm thinking that we may not be able to get through all of them, but I'm going to try and check some your way quickly. So Peggy had one. Is
Rashina, can I make a quick comment? Just there was a follow-up comment by Peggy that about how hard it is, or that it is hard for newcomers to talk to people who have attended ICSI many times. And I just want to, I agree completely. And I just wanted to bring up that David Notkin, the late and great David Notkin, used to have this kind of rule of thumb that all of us should kind of go out of our way and outside of our immediate group of people with whom, you know, we've hung out for years and who we're seeing perhaps yet again at another ICSI, and try to meet at least one person you haven't met before. And that it really applies to everybody. So it applies to people like us who've been at an ICSI before, and people whose first time coming to an ICSI is this year or next year or whenever. And I think there, you know, if you make a conscious effort, that could actually make a difference. You meet somebody new, somebody with a, you know, kind of a fresh perspective, somebody who might not know anybody. You make it easier for them to kind of internalize the whole conference experience and to want to come back, which I think is very, very important. Because it can be incredibly lonely walking in a hallway with 1,000 other people where everybody seems to know somebody and you literally don't know anybody else. So there's, you know, you could make that effort. And that used to be something that David used to stress a lot.
No, thanks for picking on that, Neno. Absolutely, very, very important. And yeah, it takes a lot of courage, especially when you're new, and to come up and speak to somebody. And especially if you see a big crowd around them, you're like, oh, should I be carrying my autograph book? Or but it's amazing to see how these all the et als turn into human people when you get to an actual conference. So that's cool. I am sorry, we're gonna run out of time. So what I'm gonna do is try and see if I can pick up on someone who hasn't asked a question before. Okay, Puyan says, how do you choose the problems that you would like to solve? This is kind of in line with what Perky was trying to get at as well. I typically see this anti-pattern that people, and sometimes including myself, have an expertise in one thing, and we try to find problems that fits that kind of expertise we have. But I see that awesome researchers try to solve difficult and relevant problems. So that will be our last one. And over to you, Neno.
That's honestly, Puyan, that's a fantastic question. It's an impossible question to answer because you have to get lucky also. So since you addressed the question in writing, at least to myself and Yuri, I have to say that I got lucky that Yuri's advisor, this former advisor at the time, decided he wanted to do something very different. So now there was this smart person with a dangling topic, and he had to figure out how he could shoehorn it into something else. So he just kind of fell in my lap. So I got lucky in that sense. I tell my students all the time, and I know you're not a student, of course, but I think the advice applies. I tell my students all the time, especially early on in their PhD careers, because that's something that was told to me. You come into a PhD thinking you're going to do a dissertation that's going to change the world. chances are your dissertation is not going to change the world. It's going to change a small part of the world. Certainly, it's going to change your life. It's going to change a small part of the world. It's going to impact some number of people. Every once in a while, you might hit pay dirt. You might hit a really important problem with the hammer that you have. So you mentioned you have some, some knowledge, some tools that you can bring, intellectual tools you can bring to a problem. That might be the right set of ingredients, plus, maybe the right set of collaborators to attack that important problem. Very often, people who do that don't know until it happens. So I think it was yesterday that it was the 333rd anniversary since Newton published Principia Mathematica, right? Yeah, that's sure. He might have known when he was doing it that this was really going to be a big deal. For most of the rest of us, it's not like that, right? You have a student, you have an obligation to them. They really need to publish to graduate. There's an expectation of you that you're going to publish. The funding agencies expect that there are going to be measurable results. So, your deadlines to ICSI, to journal, to FSC, whatever you might be shooting for, they kind of set the stage for and kind of the horizon for your short-term goals. You have to force yourself, of course, to have a larger picture in mind. But again, you always should have, I think all of us do, in the back of your mind, this question of, is this an important problem? What's kind of the big picture? And sometimes the problem is just a small one. And it's, you literally, it's good enough for one ICSI paper. And I tell my students all the time, you know what, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fantastic. Imagine how much of humanity has never published an ICSI, right? So I think striking out on a really big problem that's a kind of a genuine gold mine, that requires a sustained effort in an area. Eventually you're going to get there because you have to bring different ingredients. You're not going to wake up in the morning and just go, oh yeah, I know how I'm going to do this. Sort of like very rarely will you see one of those famous mathematical theorems being proven in a super elegant way where the proof is like 2 pages. That happens actually recently. I was reading about this. It does actually happen. There's sort of this flash in the pan kind of thing. But very often, these proofs tend to run hundreds of pages and they're super complex. And what it actually suggests is that in addition to being brilliant, you also have to put in a lot of sweat and often tears into actually attacking these problems. And that's, I think, the only way that for most of us, something of lasting impact is going to happen.
Awesome. Look, we have run out of time, but thank you so much, everybody, for all your questions. And I'm sorry we couldn't take on a couple more that I can see, but remember, you still have that opportunity to have a conversation with Neno and everybody else by following them in the lobby and striking up a conversation to take on that advice Neno said before and meet someone you haven't met before by doing the chat through the lobby and so forth. And wow, what a super zen Chuck Norris cover up everything session. Amazing job. Thank you. And thanks everybody for participating. It was lovely seeing everyone.
Thank you, Neno.
All right, see everyone.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Everybody stay safe and healthy.
Indeed.
And next year in Madrid. Yeah. Next year we'll see each other in Madrid.
Yeah. Good. Very nice. Hopefully.
Otherwise,
nice to see everybody.
Yeah. But then we won't be distancing on my sailboat.
Well, we can all have sailboats. We can go with we have a fleet of sailboats.
Take care.
Bye. Thanks, Rashina. Thanks, Danny. Janet, your cat's not
there.
You
redefine social distancing, Peggy.
Yes, yes. Yes, you can't get too close to people here.
Yeah, literally.
And thanks, Rashina, for arranging and handling and moderating the session. You did an excellent job as well.
Fantastic job.
I agree, absolutely, yes. Yep.
Yeah, nice to see you guys and hope we'll connect again in another session. Okay, take care.